Hello everybody, and welcome back to another Walking Dead video, and today we'll be doing my rewrites for The Walking Dead Season 7. But before we get into this, I do recommend you go and watch the previous ones so you fully understand the situation and all the changes I made. I will be going through a little quick rundown of what are the big changes, but there are some smaller ones that I do recommend you go back and watch them. If you look in the top right, you will see a little indication telling you about the Season 6s. But before we jump into this video, let's talk about the rules and rewrites that I'm carrying on. So, what's my rules? Well, my rules are three simple rules. First of all is that I must keep somewhat close to the story. I cannot be like, I hate this entire season, I'm going to make an entire new season. That is just full-on fan fiction. My goal is to have something which is different, but you can see the connections to the show. That will be the plan. Second point is that death is inevitable. I can change it, I can move it back and forth in a season, but I can't avoid it altogether. If a character dies that I want to keep alive, I can switch out to another character dying so that character survives. However, I can't just pretend that death never existed. And my third and final rule is a bit like death is inevitable, but if an actor stated they wanted to leave the show at any point, for example, when Andrew Lincoln left the show, I have to get rid of him. That is inevitable. I can't even switch it out. That character has to leave. So when we get to like 10, 9, and even 8, we have a lot of characters that are just leaving because the actor wanted to leave. So I have to get rid of those characters still. I can't just magic up or avoid that. And those are the rules I have to abide by. But now let's talk about my rewrites that I'm bringing forward into Season 7. The big ones is that Andrea is still alive. Sasha died in Season 3 in Andrea's place. Tara is also dead and died in Season 5, taking Noah's death. And Tyree survived to No Way Out to die in No Way Out. We also have some other ones like Carl has already killed multiple people. In Season 6 especially, he killed Ron and then the little boy, so we have a darker Carl. Spencer has also been a thorn in Rick's side for all of Season 6 and constantly been trying to start a rebellion, even managing to take control away from Rick during No Way Out. The big deaths of Season 6 are Heath when he got Denise's death, and we also have Abraham dying as I moved episode 1 of Season 7 to be the final episode of Season 6. So Abraham dies the same, and Rick had to choose between Glenn or Daryl and chose Glenn to die. By the end of the season, Negan took both Denise and Daryl, and the lineup for the big bash in the head scene was slightly different, with Morgan being there, no Aaron, and we also had Denise there. So those are my rewrites. Now let's jump right into my Season 7 rewrites. So Season 7 Episode 1 will actually follow the plot of Season 7 Episode 4. And it will be basically the same as in the show, with the Savors coming to Alexandria and Rick having to show Negan around. I felt this would be a very strong opener just to show how broken Rick is after him basically being the reason why Glenn is dead in the end of Season 6. So we get Negan being showed around everything by Rick. Everything is the same. The slight difference will be, though, the Michonne subplot will be slightly different, as in the show it's about Michonne going out to learn the shoot. In my rewrites, it is Michonne and Andrea both going out so that Andrea can teach Michonne how to shoot, because they both want to get revenge for what happened. They are both focusing on this goal, and this plot will come to head like it does in the show. However, it's more Andrea taking the lead than Michonne, and Rick snatching the gun off them, and Andrea and Michonne stepping down temporarily just so that Rick gets out of their way so they can carry on later. This episode will end with a small scene with Spencer talking to some Alexandrians and even coming up and confronting Michonne and Andrea about Rick and how they could take over Rick and maybe get a better deal with Negan. Both Michonne and Andrea tell Spencer to go away and they have their own things to do, and that is the end of the episode. Episode 2 will follow the plot of Episode 6 of the show, which is Swear. However, as Tara is dead, Aaron will be the one to find Oceanside. The plot will be slightly different. It won't take up the entire episode. It will just be a plot of Aaron gets separated from Carol and he ends up at Oceanside, and it's about them trying to kill him and Aaron trying to escape and get back to Carol. It'd be more or less the same, but very streamlined, minus the random scenes where they're just eating dinner and when they're chilling. It'd be more about set in one day, not set over a couple days. The plot B of this episode will focus on Carol after Aaron and her got separated on the bridge and her trying to find him. However, while she's looking for Aaron, she'll end up stumbling across a massive cache of supplies instead, and it'll be about her trying to get that cache of supplies back to the RV because they've been out there for months and they haven't found anything yet. So she's thinking, okay, we need to get these supplies back as this is more urgent than Aaron, who could probably just make his own way back. The plot B will end with Aaron and Carol meeting back up at the bridge and Aaron being shown all the supplies that Carol found while looking for him. The final plot will focus on Daryl and will loosely follow the plot of episode 3. However, it will focus more on Daryl than Dwight. Dwight is just there as it's just a focus on Daryl and it's showing us how badly Daryl is being treated in Sanctuary. In this plot, we will see all the things that Daryl does in episode 3, but we'll also get a small shot of Daryl at the hospital, in the little hospital area, and we'll see that Denise is being treated way better than Daryl, and she's been forced to properly become a doctor, and she's kind of been an assistant to the current Sanctuary doctor. This plot will end with Daryl actually getting a little note from Sherry about she's going to try and help him escape. Going back to the plot A and B, that plot will end with Aaron and Carol going back to Alexandria and Morgan being at the gate, opening the door, and it will end with Carol finding out what happened while they were away, who's dead, and that the Saviours actually survived. The kind of point of this episode is to have Carol and Daryl be opposites, where Carol starts off in this episode very optimistic and things look very hopeful with her finding supplies and Aaron get back together. Everything's fine. However, once they get back to Alexandria, her hope is destroyed. She finds out people she cared about died. But Daryl's story will be the opposite, with Daryl starting very hopeless and his story in this episode will end with hope, with him maybe being able to escape. Episode 3 will start with a sort of like time jump montage of each time Negan has visited Alexandria. It will go through each time, and about 2 to 3 weeks have passed now. It is no longer like February time like it was during the start of the season, during the end of last season. It is now about March time. We are getting deep into the spring now. Spring's fully setting in at this point. And what the premise of episode 3 will be is that it will follow multiple plots. The plot A will be about catching up with Maggie, so the plot will be basically the same as episode 5 of the show, minus all Sasha's scenes. As there's no Sasha, no one to really talk to, it's more about Maggie and Jesus dealing with Gregory and the Saviours. The premise of the episode will be mostly the same, with Maggie taking leadership during the night attack, and there'll be more focus on the night attack and less focus on everyone talking just before it. The plot B will be the Carl and Enid story, and will focus on Carl and Enid trying to get to Hilltop. There'll be less focus on the romance, as it's just them just getting to A to B. There will be a few attacks along the way, but by the time they get to Hilltop, we get the ending where Carl and Enid almost kiss. However, the trucks come out of Hilltop at the time. Carl sees them and he runs in and sneaks in, and we get the same ending more or less with Jesus. The plot C will focus on Aaron and Rick going for a supply. This episode will start and end with the Aaron and Rick story, a lot like our episode 7 of the show does. However, that plot from episode 7 will be moved into episode 3. So this episode will start with Aaron and Rick and everyone in Alexandria talking about how Carol's supplies are now gone. The Savors have taken them, they've eaten them all, they need to go out and look for more supplies. So we'll get all the scenes that are in episode 7 of the show in episode 3, and it'll all be the same kind of bookend in this episode. Episode 4 will be the episode 7 plot of the show, and the main plot will be about Carl at Sanctuary and Negan and Carl talking to each other. The Rosita plot also in this episode will be the same. The difference is that we'll get no Rick plot as that was last episode, and the episode will focus more on Spencer. Spencer be more wanting to get rid of Rick. We'll get the Gabriel and Spencer scene where Gabriel walks off, but instead of Spencer going out to look for supplies, it'll be Spencer going back and trying to convince other people that we could get rid of Rick and make a better deal with the Saviours without Rick. Andrea will see what Spencer is trying to do again and confront him about it. This would lead to a fight between Andrea and Spencer ending up winning the fight and locking Andrea in a room. Then this episode will end with Negan coming to Alexandria and Spencer greeting Negan at the door. The Michonne plot in this episode will be mostly the same, with Michonne going out to try and kill Negan solo, and there will also be a subplot with Carol and Morgan which will focus on those two looking for supplies and will follow the Spencer plot of the show with them finding the letter and the supplies. In this plot, it will have Morgan and Carol talking about the Saviours, and Carol will express her feelings of how she hates what's going on and wants to fight back. Morgan will try and convince her, no, we have to live with this now. However, it is to no avail. Episode 5 will follow the premise of episode 8 of the show, so everything with Rick and Aaron will be the same. That whole plot stays the same. The difference is that the plot with Daryl and escaping will be very much different. In this plot, it will be about Sherry helping Daryl, where she's opening the door and she's with Daryl. As they also will try and save Denise, instead of running straight for the exit, they have to make their way through the sanctuary to get to Denise, and that is the premise of the episode, with them stealthing through the episode. This will end up with Sherry and Daryl coming in contact with Dwight, and Dwight being startled that Sherry's doing something so bold and so dangerous. We will also get a scene with Sherry and Dwight, Sherry explaining we can't live like this, and Dwight eventually agreeing and becoming reluctant. Dwight would finish this by saying where Denise is and tell Daryl to knock Dwight out to make it seem more realistic that Dwight wasn't there aware of the situation that was going on. Once Sherry and Dwight make it to the medical area and where Denise is, the doctor at Sanctuary ends up finding them, trying to stop them. This leads to Sherry having to take out and kill the doctor just before they escape, and the plot ends with these three characters escaping with the help of Jesus after Jesus finds them, like Jesus found Daryl in the show. It's basically the same from that point onwards. The Negan plot of this episode is basically the same up until a point. As Negan is chilling with Olivia, Carl and Judith in the house, Morgan sees this, and as Morgan has more of a relationship with Carl in my rewrites, Morgan gets very defensive, and Morgan will see what Negan is doing with Carl at the house. This would lead to Morgan telling Negan to back off and get away, and lead between a fight between the two characters. This fight would start off in Morgan's favour, however Negan would end up getting the upper hand and putting Morgan on the floor and about to bash his head in. However, Carl will step in and try and convince Negan not to do it. Negan, obviously having a soft spot for Carl, would end up letting Morgan live. However, someone still has to die. He tells one of the Savors to shoot someone, and Morgan is the reason of Olivia's death, not Rosita in the show. At this point, Spencer will then come to the house, and we'll get everything the same between Spencer and Negan, with Negan kind of in a really bad mood after what just happened. However, things start to change when this instead focuses on Andrea escaping and some Saviours finding her and laughing about it. This is when one of the Saviours picks them up and brings them to Negan to find out what they found, and instead of Negan straight up just killing Spencer because he's talking about getting rid of Rick, Negan tells Spencer and everyone to get on their knees so Negan can find out what happened. Once the truth eventually comes out, where Spencer is the reason Andrea is beaten up and was locked in a room, Spencer gets told to stand up, and he gets told, you got no guts, you couldn't kill him, so what do? Instead, you beat up his girl. That is when Spencer gets his guts slashed open, and we get the scene where Rosita then tries to kill Negan. We get the same scene, everything is all the same. However, random Alexandria is then killed instead of Olivia as she's already dead. Once Rick gets back, we get the Negan and Rick scene. However, the scene is slightly different as it focuses on Negan telling Rick to get it together. People have tried to kill him twice here, and he needs to get it all together and shut stuff down, as Negan sees it as Rick's people have way too much power to do what they want, as people tried to kill him twice. And then there's a scene where Negan tells Rick to get on his knees and beg for a thank you, because Negan just shut down a rebellion. People wanted to take his life and get rid of them so they could be leaders. And the scene ends with Rick having to ask Negan and say, "Thank you, Negan, for saving me." This episode will end mostly the same. The Michonne plot is the same as in the show, but this episode will end with not just Michonne coming to Rick and being like, we need to fight back. It'll be a collective group of people with more than one person being like, we need to fight back. This is not enough. What happened today is that 3 people died and multiple people got injured, and Rick agrees, and the episode ends with everyone in the little room who's in there is going to be Rick, Michonne, Andrea, Carol, and Aaron. Those people are going to be like, we need to fight back. And the episode ends with Rick agreeing and preparing to get a group together to fight the Saviour. Episode 6 will follow episode 9 of the show, and this is where we meet the Kingdom. This episode will start the same with everyone at Hilltop, and then Gregory saying, no, we're not going to help. And while they're walking out, we get characters like Sherry mentioning that the Saviours had more than one group. Before Alexandria, there's probably another group out there, and Jesus confirming them and taking them to the Kingdom. The characters going on this trip are Rick, Sherry, Michonne, Daryl, Denise, Jesus, Rosita, Carl, Carol, Morgan, and that is the group that is going. The plot of this episode will be basically the same as in the show, minus the Morgan and Carol plots, as they aren't at the Kingdom already. There'll be a small plot of Morgan where he meets Benjamin and Henry for the first time, and they talk about what the Kingdom is like, everything like that. And Morgan's plot ends with him trying to go off and find Carol. Before Rick leaves, however, characters like Michonne offer to stay behind for a bit so that they can talk to Sherry, talk to Daryl to get a plan, and keep a line of communication between Alexandria and the Kingdom open. Morgan also has a conversation with Carol about we can have a new start here, and Carol reluctantly agrees, so Carol and Morgan also decide to stay at the Kingdom. So everything is the same with them going back, however it's only Carl, Rick, Rosita and Jesus heading back to Alexandria and the Hilltop. At the end of this episode, we will have Richard approach Carol about the Saviours. And moving on to the plot B, we'll focus on Andrea and Aaron going to look for Gabriel as he's missing. Andrea will be the one to take Rick's roles, and Aaron will take Michonne's. Everything about this plot will be the same, and it will go up until the point of Andrea meeting the Spiked Walker. The episode will end with her going up with Jada to be pushed down the pit and meeting the Spiked Walker. Credits. Episode 7 will continue the pit plot from episode 6 with Andrea and Aaron. It'll be all the same with Andrea being the one taking all of Rick's roles and fighting the Walker, with Aaron trying to help from the outside. Everything about this episode will be the same with that plot. The plot B, however, will focus on the people at the Kingdom. There are 3 plots of the Kingdom. One plot is to deal with Morgan, and this will be the start of the episode where we have Morgan going to a Saviour meetup and a fight starts. Morgan's at breaking it up and going back. However, the plot from now on will focus on Morgan training Henry, as Henry saw what Morgan did, is interested and would like to know. Morgan was very happy to do this as he's tried to do it before with Carl, but Carl was reluctant and gave up. So he sees Henry as a new Carl basically and is very happy to do this. The plot B will focus on Michonne, Daryl, Sherry and Denise, and will be about Michonne asking the 3 characters what is Sanctuary like, where is it, and how many people there are. This plot will be a small plot with just these characters talking about what their experiences, what they look like, and then building out a map and fulfilling a plan for how will they take down Negan. How can they break into Sanctuary and kill them all very quickly? So that's the focus of that plot, with that plan being set in motion for an attack on Sanctuary. We will get some scenes in this plot with Ezekiel being very friendly to Michonne and Michonne being very friendly back. This will be more the building a bond between these two characters, as Michonne is trying to convince Ezekiel to join in on the plan and help them fight, but Ezekiel is still reluctant. The final part of this episode will be after the Morgan attack and Richard gets his ass kicked by Morgan for trying to start a fight. Richard and Carol will talk again about how will they get the Kingdom to join in on the fight, and will be about those two characters trying to figure out a way for the Kingdom to get in the fight no matter what. What will happen in this plot is a lot of Richard scenes that were used in the show with Morgan and Daryl, where Richard's telling those characters about the supplies he has. But in the show, it's him showing Carol his supply cache, him showing Carol his plan so far, and Carol being very happy to agree with it, as Carol wants the war to happen as much as he does. Episode 8 will start with a small time jump of a couple days, and this episode will start with Rick and everyone in Alexandria still unable to find any guns for Jadis and her group to make the deal. And this episode will start with Aaron coming to terms of, does he tell everyone about Oceanside? Does he do it? Does he not? And at the start of this episode, Aaron finally does it. He gets everyone together and he tells everyone about Oceanside. Once he tells everyone, episode 15's plot comes into motion, and it's everyone going to Oceanside to go get the guns. However, there is a slight difference, as characters like Daryl and Michonne are still in the Kingdom forming their plan and getting everything ready for when they come back with a full plan. So everything is the same, with minus any Michonne or Daryl scenes, and they'll be filled in with other characters like Andrea or Rosita. Plot B of this episode will be about Eugene and him setting into Sanctuary, and all the scenes he has in the show will be here. There will be nothing to do with Dwight and framing the Doctor, as the Doctor is already dead in my rewrites from the hands of Sherry. There is no need for any of the Dwight scenes. We barely see Dwight in this episode, and it's just about Eugene becoming a saviour. Episode 9 will follow up off episode 14 with Morgan and Richard and Carol's plot. So everything goes off the same in this episode, with the plan up to Richard's death. Everything is the same, minus the bit where they run to Carol's house. As Carol lives inside of Kingdom, they ran back to the Kingdom, and Benjamin died within the Kingdom's walls. The next day, Morgan kills Richard at the meeting point, and when Morgan heads back in that day, we actually find out that Carol was involved in the plan, and Carol, feeling guilty for what happened to Benjamin, and it was slightly her fault, tells Morgan what's happened. This leads to a scene where Morgan straight up tries to kill Carol. He pushes her to the floor and strangles her nearly to death. However, he is stopped at the last moment by Michonne, who throws him off and grabs Carol. This plot ends with Carol, Michonne and the group, everyone who stayed minus Morgan, heading back to Alexandria, leaving Morgan and the Kingdom by himself. The plot B of this episode will focus on Maggie at the Hilltop, and will follow the plot where Simon and the Saviours go to Hilltop to try and take their Doctor. It would all be the same, with more of a focus on the people of the Hilltop choosing Maggie over Gregory and helping Maggie hide and helping her escape. There'd be more focus on that, while Gregory keeps trying to point her out and be like, there's someone dodgy here, can you help me? Simon does the same as he does in the show, gives him a letter with the location of Sanctuary, and that is the end of the plot. Episode 10 starts with Michonne's group telling Rick about their plan to attack Sanctuary, and Rick talking about now they have the men to do so because of James' deal. They can do it. So the whole point of this episode, the whole point is to do the plan and have a small group of people go into Sanctuary, make a distraction to drag them all out of Sanctuary, so they're all out in the open and Rick and James' group can kill them all. So a small group goes in of 5 people. We have Daryl, Carol, Michonne, and people who know the place, Sherry and Denise. So their plan is to go in to Sanctuary, cause some distractions, and maybe start a fire in the factory floor to try and get people to panic and leave the building. However, the plan goes wrong. Denise messes up and the Saviours notice and all hell breaks loose. The group of 5 gets split up into 2 groups. We get Daryl and Sherry, which have to escape by themselves, and Sherry ends up getting shot and injured. Then we have the second group, which is Michonne, Carol, and Denise. They find an exit, but it's so small only one can get out at a time. Michonne goes first to check if it's clear. They then put Denise through, and then just as Carol's going through last, she gets caught and brought back into Sanctuary. Once everyone is outside or captured of Sanctuary, the episode will then focus on the Saviours making sure to get in defensive positions around Sanctuary and fighting. Jada's realising that this is going to be a very bloody fight and they might lose some of her people. She prioritises her own people over Rick's and tells her people to pull back. She doesn't want to lose any of her people. She cares too much about them and she runs away. This leaves Rick's group heavily outnumbered by the Saviours. After some fighting, Rick realises the battle is going to be lost and calls a retreat for everyone to run back to Alexandria for a final stand. And that is the end of the episode, of everyone retreating after their plan went wrong. Episode 11 of the show will take place right after episode 10. One plot of episode 11 will focus on Dwight being sent out to go hunt down Daryl and Sherry. In this plot, Dwight will end up finding Daryl and a wounded Sherry and have to try and nurse Sherry and stop the bleeding. During this plot, Dwight and Sherry will have to talk about what's happening, how Sherry almost died and she's going to end up getting herself killed if she continues. Dwight comes up with the idea that they could just run away. However, Sherry is like, no, if we leave now, they could lose the war and we'll always be running away from the Saviours and always watching our backs. So they come to an agreement that Sherry will go into hiding and Dwight will fight for Sherry. As Sherry's injured, Dwight doesn't want her to fight anymore. He wants her to just hide, heal up, and he will find her when the war is over. This plot will end with Dwight telling Daryl about Negan's plan to attack Alexandria at night and Sherry saying that we have to get the other communities. This plot will end with Sherry going off to get everyone at the kingdom, Daryl trying to head to Hilltop, and Dwight planning to delay Negan and his group to get into Alexandria to bide time. Plot B will be a Carol plot dealing with her being imprisoned in Sanctuary. This plot will be like the Sasha plot from episode 15 and all the scenes will be the same, exactly the same, with Carol in that place. Everything will be the same with Carol even begging Eugene to give her a cyanide pill so she can kill herself. Carol comes to the conclusion that if she kills herself, her walker self could do some damage. She could probably do more damage as a walker than a human at this point. And Carol is dealing with the grief of ruining her relationship with Morgan, getting rid of that friendship and that bond they made after No Way Out, and inadvertently killing a child. And this episode ends with Carol getting that cyanide pill. Episode 12 is the final episode of the season and will follow the plot of episode 16 of the show. This episode will start with Rick and everyone getting back to Alexandria after what happened in episode 10. This episode will focus a lot more of them getting ready to have a last stand against the Saviours. Rick sees this as they're all going to die. He doesn't see this as a win. Rick's just getting ready to fight one more time and getting the people who can't fight out of Alexandria before it's too late. This episode will focus more on the battle that will happen, as about maybe a third through, the Alexandrians now come face to face with Negan and all his Saviours. Once Negan gets there, we don't get a big fight straight away, however. We get Negan trying to keep the Alexandrians under their foot for one last time. This is his final attempt, and we get the big coffin scene, and when he opens the door, out comes a dead Carol, and Carol gets Sasha's death. Once Rick and the Alexandrians see a dead Carol, they all open fire and a fight breaks out between the two communities. There is more of a struggle while the Alexandrians are slowly losing ground and the Saviours are gaining ground in Alexandria, and Negan finally gets Rick back under his foot and on the ground. Everything what from that point onwards and after this battle, which take up most of the episode, will be the same. With we get shots from the other communities with them deciding to come and help Alexandria in their time of need, and Daryl and Sherry get into those communities and saying that you need to come now, Alexandria is under attack. Once we go back to the main Alexandria plot, the communities will both come in and we'll get the final heroic battle with the three communities unifying to push out Negan and the Savors outside of Alexandria, and everything like that will be the same. All the hallucination scenes that happen in episode 16 of the show will happen in my rewrites, however they'll be different. Instead of it being about Sasha and Abraham like it is in the show, my rewrites have it about Carol and Tyrese just before No Way Out, and about those two characters having their last meeting before the events of No Way Out. And as we go through the episode, we see shots of this hallucination, and by the end of the episode we'll see the final shot of the hallucination, which is where Carol and Tyrese leave the house that they were in for the last time, as it takes place right before No Way Out and right before Tyrese gets bit. This episode will end with the group of Alexandrians that left because they couldn't fight return to Alexandria, and that's characters like Carl, the kids, Judith, and Denise. They're now returning back to Alexandria. The big parts of the ending will focus on Daryl telling Sherry to leave while Sherry's preparing to get ready to fight again. Daryl pulls Sherry aside and says, "You promised to leave," and Sherry agrees, and Sherry ends this episode with packing her bags and leaving to go find somewhere to hide so that Dwight doesn't need to worry about her during the war, and Daryl doesn't have to worry about looking after Sherry for Dwight. The big ending is that Morgan has to put down Carol. Morgan and Carl end up going out to go look for Carol, and they end up finding a Walker Carol. Morgan completely destroyed by seeing that he feels responsible for yet another character death. He just falls down and breaks down. He eventually gets back up and finally takes out Carol and turns around and hugs Carl. In the scene, he ends up calling Carl Dwayne, and Carl ends up having to correct him, and the episode ends with a slightly hopeful ending with the three communities finally together getting ready to take out the Saviours. And that is my rewrites for season 7. So what do you think about my rewrites? Did you like the changes I make? Did you not like it? Please tell me your opinion down below. Do you like my big changes like Carol dying in season 7? What's your opinion on me killing off Carol? I'd like to know all your thoughts and opinions and what your rewrites are. Please tell me what your rewrites for season 7 are. I was almost going to combine seasons 7 and 8 together, how I thought that'd be too long, so they're still separate, but you could sometimes, if you wanted to, see them as one big season. But please tell me down below what your thoughts and opinions are, and if you want more Walking Dead content, please look on the screen. If you want season 6, look on the top right, there's season 6 rewrites, and if you want to keep up to date with all things Walking Dead, make sure to subscribe, and I recommend you do, so you can keep up to date for all things Walking Dead and keep up to date with my rewrites. But this is it for me today, so goodbye, peace out, and I'll talk to you at a later date.